Tell me a little bit about yourself in terms of how you grew up. Are you a Bal Tshuva, Choser B'Tshuva, or are you a FFB? How did you get where you are now?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm not an expert on Hebrew or Aramaic. I'm actually learning it right now. So although I can read and write Hebrew and Aramaic, I think you're a little more advanced as far as terminology. Although I might not know the Hebrew terminology if you put it into English.
You know about Tshuva, right?
Yes, absolutely. Jeff Seidel found me at the wall. My parents, after high school, instead of sending me to college, because I was following the Grateful Dead around the country.
Cool.
So after high school, they sent me to Israel to learn a little bit about my heritage, and they sent me to Dagan Yabet, a secular kibbutz. And after I was there for a month, I had some time off. This is in 1981, and I wasn't at the
kibbutz Daganya. That's I think the kibbutz that David Ben Gurion started, or something like that, or he's buried there.
I haven't heard that. I know Moshe Dayan is on Daganya Aleph, and I know that Daganya was was the first line of defense from the Syrians in the wars.
It's famous for sure. It's well known.
Definitely. So I had a week off, and it was around the time of Yom Kippur. So I went to the Kotel. I went to Jerusalem, and I wasn't there for 2 minutes. And I'm sure you've heard the story many times. Baruch Goldstein and Jeff Seidel were there. Jeff tapped me on the shoulder. Are you Jewish? What are you doing? Would you like Shabbos meal? It was Friday evening, and long story short, would you come stay at Aish? Don't go back to Daganya. You could stay here. We'll pay for your room and board for as long as you want to stay. So instead of going back to pick bananas and pick up an irrigation system for the cotton fields, because it's fall time, so bringing everything down. I decided to take advantage of the quote-unquote dumb religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, and take advantage of their free room and board in Jerusalem. And I had to go to 4 classes a day, 4 hours a day. Instead of working on the kibbutz, it was a no-brainer, So, I thought I was taking advantage of them, but the first 2 weeks there was no school because we were off for Shavuot, and so we went on, a camping trip to the Golan. I did my first Shomer Shabbat to the sunrise, and it was a beautiful thing. And while we were up there, we picked up all my stuff at Daganya. I went back to Aish, and after the 2 weeks off, I met Andy, Hanan Kaufman, and Yaakov, Jason Saver, and the 2 of them were quote-unquote responsible for me, and so for the next 8 weeks, or 6 to 8 weeks, I basically debated them on everything that I could think of, and I had
from a secular
believed
perspective, you mean? You were skeptical about religion.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't, if anything, I believed in the New Testament, which I did for several years. I mean, it all seemed to me, it all made sense to me because I didn't know the other half of the story. But that's the attitude I went in with. I considered myself an atheist, and of course, Reb Noach, listen, there's no such thing as an atheist, only an agnostic, and I did the 48 Ways class with him every morning, and I did the other classes as well. And after 6-7 weeks of me battling them and them responding, I was ready to leave. And I did. I left. And when I got back to the U.S. is when it all hit me that they had planted a seed. And, as Reb Noach said, check out the facts. How do you know what you know? What are you living for? And, whether religious or not, I couldn't deny that these were excellent questions. And that set me on a journey. And for the next approximate 8 years, until I went back to Aish in 89, I did as thorough a search as I could possibly do. I spoke with Muslims, Christians of all denominations. I was on the phone with the Saudi Arabian embassy in Washington, D.C. for 4 hours one day. They sent me the Quran and tons of stuff and pamphlets and things like that. And
so you were trying to convert them to Judaism?
No, I was trying to learn about their religion. I wanted to learn about everything I could. Not convert. I wasn't Jewish. I was checking out the facts. I wanted to see what Christianity really was. I wanted to see what Islam was, Buddhism, Confucianism, Hinduism, any religion that I could find.
So the spark they placed in you was a hunger for God, not necessarily Judaism at that point in time.
No, I wouldn't call it a hunger for God because I was checking out political philosophies as well. I would say it was a hunger for the truth. Does God exist? What happens when we die? It was more along those types of questions. And if God does exist, which religion is the true religion? So it was simply a quest for the truth. And by the time around 89, in 85, I moved down to Jacksonville, Florida. And by 89, I had come to the realization that no one I spoke with, of course, we didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have cell phones. I mean, making contacts wasn't as easy as it was. I didn't know there was an Aish in New York that I could go to. But I wanted to go back to Aish in Jerusalem because I realized that there was something there that I couldn't find anywhere else. They were, I asked a question, they responded to it. No beating around the bush. So I wanted to go back and learn from them and question them more. So I flew in. I stayed for 5 weeks. I did the beginners seminar.
Essentials of Discovery?
Well, I did Essentials, yes. But the first 4 days I was there, the Discovery seminar had just started. So, yeah, I did the Discovery seminar first. And in those, it was the 4-day seminar. So it was pretty intense. And I was simply blown away. I was not prepared for what hit me. And, the questions I asked, the responses they gave me. After that seminar, I walked out convinced that Torah from Sinai is real and that God gave Torah at Sinai, and that is the one true religion. And for the next 4.5 weeks or so, I studied more, asked many, many questions, and came back to Jacksonville convinced that Torah is correct. And I called the Orthodox show there and asked if I could come. And, of course, the rabbi there was very nice. I believe it was Rabbi Adler. He left since then. But I started praying and going to Torah observant shows and observing the Chagim with the Torah observant, in addition to going to the conservative show down there as well. Of course, the Reform I really never got. I was really never much interested in. But
you were born Jewish, right?
Yeah.
Both your parents are Jewish?
All 4 of my grandparents were Orthodox. They came from Russia in 1917. My grandfather on my mother's side was a Gabbai, and my grandfather on my father's side was a Kabbalist. He was the head rabbi, or one of the head rabbis, of a town called Kukovich I've searched for this town. I've called the Russian embassy in Washington. They have never heard of it, but my grandmother said that was the name of the city that they came from. And that's a bit of my background there. How about you?
Are you sure it wasn't Lubavitch? Maybe she got the words mixed up.
I can only tell you what she said. And, she could have been mistaken. She was 95 years old, but she still had her wits about her. I mean, this was at her vacation home down in Belmar, so she's still pretty self-reliant. But she said Kupich. She didn't say Lubavitch. So maybe she was wrong, but she still had her memory intact, and she told me a lot of stories about what happened. So that's all I can tell you.
I wasn't born Jewish. I converted to Judaism around 20 years ago. After I converted, I went to Israel to learn, but I went cold turkey. I didn't know where I was going. I made my way to the old city, and all these programs there that are for Balchuvas or irreligious Jews just traveling through Israel, are not geared towards religious people. People like Jeff Seidel, Rabbi Meir Schuster, the Heritage House, all these institutions, they do great work. But if you're already religious and a convert, which means you're religious but you don't know anything about Judaism, they don't know where to place you. I applied in many yeshivot. The one that ended up accepting me was Aish Torah. Now, in Israel, you could learn in any yeshiva. You could learn there, eat there. The question is do they let you dorm there? I mean, like the Mir, there's thousands of people who learn on the Mir, but there's maybe around 150 people who actually dorm there. Dorming or sleeping at the place is what officially makes you a student of that place. While I was in Aish, I hopped around into different yeshivot or Sameach, Yeshivat Kotel. That's what you do. Your friends invite you over for shiur, and then you get to know all the local rabbis. But yeah,
was that all of those places? Most of those places you mentioned.
The way I met Jeff Seidel was because I was in Aish, and Jeff's office is still in the old city, and somebody told me to go in and see if he needs any help to make money. In Israel, it's very hard to make money. I didn't go to Israel with money. Aish was actually letting me learn for free. Like most yeshivas there. I mean, they'll tell you, okay, you don't have to pay now. If you ever come across money, send us some. Yeah, I mean, I started working for Jeff Seidel. I worked for him probably a total of 10 years, even though I lived in Israel only 5 years. I was working for him even in America, running his office from America. But, yeah, I mean, he's a legend, definitely, and he's been doing it for a long time. I first got there in around, I think, 2003. It was a long time from when you were there. But I'm sure the old city hasn't changed much. It hasn't changed much in 2,000 years, I'm sure. Right? But I ended up making Aliyah, and I lived in a place called Kohav Shachar, which is in the Shtachim, in the settlements, around 15 kilometers northeast of Yerushalayim. But I worked in the old city every day, so then I would tramp in. I mean, I was like an old city guy. Everyone in the old city there.
What were your parents? What religion? What were you born?
I was born Catholic. However, my mother became Protestant when I was around 12 years old, and my father remained Catholic. Before I converted to Judaism, I became a Christian, and I went to seminary as a Christian. I mean, I really ran towards religion in every aspect, and I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I learned for a couple of years in seminary, and then I started questioning. I mean, I started asking questions that people usually don't ask. The same kind of questions I ask today in Judaism. I'm known for asking questions that the average Jew doesn't ask. But yeah, I came to the realization that JC wasn't God or the Messiah. So I felt I was forced to become Jewish. I mean, where else am I going to go? I still believe in the God of Israel, right? So now it's just the God of Israel minus Jesus. And, so I went to my local Orthodox synagogue. I spent 3 years there. I converted. And then, like I said, I went to Israel. So when I was in Israel, working in outreach for unaffiliated Jews in Jerusalem, I had the weird idea of I mean, anyone who's been to Yerushalayim knows that there's tons of Gentiles there, and these aren't just regular Gentiles. These are Gentiles who are hungry for God, and I'm not talking about Muslims. So then I was thinking, why not expand my outreach efforts to include Gentiles? So then all over the old city, I would put up posters just asking people, have they considered becoming Jewish? I don't remember exactly what I said. I think I have a picture of one of the posters on my Facebook page. It said something like, you're in the holiest city in the world. All this could be yours. I said, if you're interested in becoming Jewish, go to your local synagogue or buy these books for more information. I guess it's not really proselytizing. For some reason, people nowadays consider proselytizing, going door to door and telling people that if they don't do this, they're going to go to hell. No. I mean, I was asking people to look into something. Not that they had to do it, but if they were hungry, if they were interested, I wanted them to know that it was available. Because the average Gentile doesn't know you could convert to Judaism. They're shocked. I mean, they're like, think you have to be born Jewish. And I think that just by having an open door policy, which is what Islam has, Islam is the fastest growing religion right now, and they don't actively proselytize. They're just very welcoming to anyone who's interested. And that's really what I do. I mean, my audience, when I'm speaking about basic Judaism, is typically Christians or former Christians. And when I'm teaching halakha, I mean, it's rabbis and yeshiva students. In other words, the people who listen to me are already religious. They just need a nudge in the right direction. So I wouldn't call that proselytizing. I would call that making someone who's already good better. But of course, my haters depict me in horrible ways in terms of what I actually do. I mean, they think that I'm a Jay Witness or a Mormon, walking around saying, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. Right? Which I never teach on topics like hell or heaven or anything metaphysical. That doesn't appear in the Torah. You came across my name, or at least I think you did, because of the controversy or because someone said something derogatory.
No, someone simply asked me to watch one of your videos and comment on it. Mm-hmm. That's all that it was, and it was the video of you approaching the rabbis from Chabad about putting on tefillin and other things that were mentioned. So I was not given at first any picture of you, whether negative or positive. I was asked to make my own decision. And as I mentioned on our call this morning, and as you saw on that post, I had no problem with what you were doing. I said, obviously, you're miznagdom, and, I'm miznagdom too. So we have some differences with the Hasidim, but I don't consider them adversaries. I
don't consider them adversaries either, and I don't consider them idolaters. I mean, even if they believe the Rebbe's the Messiah or in some twisted way believe that he's part of God, I just consider them Jews who are slightly misguided. But is that the only video you saw? You didn't see any other video?
No, I didn't. I just read some of your posts on Facebook. Mm-hmm. This was just 2 or 3 days ago, so,
yeah, it's probably
my
2 weeks ago.
Weekend, maybe 4 days ago,
So I'll tell you what I do in terms of what makes me different from the average Orthodox rabbi. The vast majority of my videos are not about encouraging people to become Jewish. I mean, I teach halakha, either from the Shulchan Aruch, from Mishneh Torah, from authoritative sources, not just the way I think things should be. But I think what makes me a little controversial is that I encourage Gentiles to consider becoming Jewish, and that I'm for Jews making a distinction in many areas, but specifically when it comes to Jewish literature. In other words, there's a hierarchy to what we believe is inspired in Judaism. There are some books that are more important than other books. There are some books that have more authority than other books.
Absolutely, sure. I mean, essentially, as Rabbi Knopfler, the Av Beis Din of Lakewood here in New Jersey, who I've met and spoken with several times, their only sources are the written and oral Torot. They don't even go to the Shulchan Aruch or the Mishneh Torah, everything is from those two sources, period. Though that's a quote from him. Of course, he does refer to other sources. There were some teshuvos of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik that he pointed out to me about conversion, explaining things, because my ex-wife is also a convert. She was raised Catholic and converted to Judaism as well. So the question of my son and his Jewishness. But anyhow, those are the two main sources. Those are the four main sources, Mishnah Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch being first, of course, to the majority of Jews.
Oral law encompasses a big section of rabbinic literature, which includes Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah. All this is considered oral law. In other words, oral law are the legal rulings of the court, of the rabbis. The rabbis developed laws or interpreted certain verses in Torah to be understood in a certain manner by Klal Yisrael. When I said that there's a hierarchy in Judaism, many nowadays make no distinction between what's called midrash and agadah, literally folklore and legend, and actual halakha, what we're actually commanded to do. In other words, one is just the icing on the cake, and one is the actual ikra, the actual source of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of oral law.
Well, correct me if I'm mistaken, we don't paskin from the midrash or the Zohar.
Many nowadays do. There are many customs that people take from the Zohar. I mean, as a matter of fact,
customs, yes. Customs, yes. That's different than a halacha.
Right. Well,
I agree with you 100% on that. But the customs are on a lower level than halacha.
If you remember the video that I made with Chabadniks putting on tefillin on people, I asked them the same question. And they were adamant that they don't paskin halacha from the Zohar. And then I just asked them a simple question. Do they put on tefillin during Chol Hamoed? I mean, this is just one of many. And they're like, of course we don't put on tefillin during Chol Hamoed. However, the halakha teaches that you're supposed to. It's the Zohar and the Arizal and the other Kabbalists who say that you don't. So they were just ignorant of this idea, but the principle amongst Kabbalists nowadays, which is what appears in the Hakdama in the introduction of the Beit Yosef, of the author of the Shulchan Aruch, is that if something doesn't contradict Talmud Bavli, then you're allowed to paskin by the Zohar. Right? Now, I don't believe this. Where Yosef Karo was, I believe, the last Rishon, people like the Rambam, the Rif, many rabbis, bigger rabbis before him, never had this idea. I mean, maybe because they didn't have the Zohar, but that's how it's typically understood. I don't want to get too much into this because I don't know if you know enough about this field, and I don't want to act like I'm trying to catch you on anything. But you can verify everything I just said.
I'm not Mr. Know-it-all by a long stretch, but I am familiar with 99% of what you said.
Okay.
I'm with you completely. I don't necessarily agree completely, but I understand everything you said. I heard of everything you mentioned, and I'm listening. But I'm with you. If there's something I don't know, a word or a phrase that you use, I'll ask. I'll say, wait a second, I don't know that. I don't know that. I'll let you know.
Judaism is very vast, which is why the average rabbi is not quick to attack someone on Facebook as an idiot or as an apocorus or whatever, just because there's so many opinions out there that no one knows them all. And in a debate, I mean, someone could just pull some weird statement of some long lost book. So most rabbis are kind of very open-minded. They're like, that's fine, that's a source, this and that. So those online and on Facebook who are quick to criticize are people who don't know much and typically have like one rabbi, right? And they feel like if you're disagreeing with this rabbi, you're disagreeing with Judaism as a whole because that's what Judaism is to them because they don't know. I mean, they're new to the religion. But I think the more people spend in Judaism, they realize that, there's so many different opinions. Now, clearly, none of these opinions are going to contradict the Torah, but in terms of how we keep, let's say, ceremonial law, Spartans do things a certain way, Bukharians do things another way, Ashkenazim do them a different way. The principle in the Talmud, it says, Elu ve'elu dir Elokim Chaim, that all these ideas are also the words of the living God, or in some way inspired. Yeah, so Judaism is a lot more diverse than people think it is nowadays. right? And there really shouldn't be any room for anyone calling anyone names. Now, in terms of correcting people, for example, the reason I said anything to these Lubavitchers, and this isn't the first time, and I wasn't like searching them out. I'm a biker. I mean, I ride motorcycles, and I'm a member of a club here, a Jewish motorcycle club called Rolling Thunder. And no, but there's a few different clubs with the same name. I mean, it's not a 1%er club or anything. It's just like a really regular motorcycle club. But every year they have a huge Israel Day ride, and these are all like secular Israelis, right? I mean, for some reason there are no frum people in this group. But Chabad's always there, putting on tefillin on people. And you know what? For those who are semi-religious or who grew up religious and want to feel like they're doing something, I think it's a great thing. My only issue is to offer it to someone who knows nothing about Torah, who knows nothing about tefillin, and only wants to put it on because they're superstitious. Right? In other words, they make putting on tefillin an act of idolatry in itself.
You're talking about Chabad? You're calling them
right.
idolaters?
My problem with Chabad is when they offer tefillin to someone who's completely not knowledgeable about anything, knows nothing about Judaism, and would in some way want to put on tefillin as a form of superstition, thinking that this is going to give him good luck. And by him believing that, he himself, the person putting on tefillin, would be making tefillin a type of idolatry. In other words, a basis act done because you think it's going to bring you good fortune, but not because it's tied to keeping mitzvot or bring you closer to a Kodesh Baruch Hu in any way. I didn't call anyone an idolater. I'm just saying that there's a halacha that one has to have clean thoughts, a clean body to put on tefillin. In other words, someone has to know something about Judaism before he's able to keep a ceremonial command that is not clear to us. For example, in Judaism, we have laws between man and man and laws between man and God. In Hebrew, it's called mitzvot ben adam lechavero and mitzvot ben adam lemakom. That between man and man, between man and God. It's also described in a different way. I mean, they're called mishpatim or hukim. Right? So mishpatim are typically also understood as mitzvot that ethically make sense, and hukim are mitzvot that don't make sense that we do, like tefillin. I think the example, right. Right, the Paraduma is a big example they give. So if you're trying to bring someone closer to Judaism, why would you start with a hook? In other words, something that the only reason we do it is because we've accepted the other mitzvot that do make sense, and because we're obedient, we're going to want to do these. In other words, by starting someone, and this is the halacha, that someone needs to have some knowledge of Torah. He has to have accepted Torah in order to put on tefillin. So in those cases, they're doing a great thing. If there was someone there who wasn't that religious, right, who grew up religious and wants to come back and wants to put on tefillin, that's a great thing. But to go up to someone who knows nothing about Judaism and throw out one of their statements, for example, one of their famous statements is, check your Jewish blood pressure, right? And they're like, here, just put this on and say this. It kind of, it takes away from Judaism. And that's the issue that Misnagdim have with the whole issue. Have with the whole spiel of putting on tefillin on people who don't know anything. So I started my conversation out asking him, can a Gentile put on tefillin? And they're like, of course not, unless he converts. And then I said, can a secular Jew, an irreligious Jew, put on tefillin? And he's like, of course, because a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. So this is another issue between the rationalists and the mystics. This idea that Jews are born intrinsically special, intrinsically closer to God, making every Gentile intrinsically inferior to them, no matter what they believe. For example, I just had a discussion with a Kahana guy, and the way he explained it is that he believed that you have two babies on the table, a Jewish baby or a baby born of a Jewish mother and a Gentile baby. That Jewish baby is automatically superior to that Gentile baby. Now, clearly, a baby doesn't know anything. So what he's saying is that this baby is an Ubermensch, and this Gentile, like Chabad puts it, they have a soul on the level of animals. Now, I have a problem with that. And not only I think the Rambam, who doesn't teach this idea, all the Tanaim, the Talmud also doesn't teach this idea. All this came with Kabbalah. So that's where my discussion was going with these Chabadniks. Not that I think that Chabad is actually doing a bad job there, right? Because I think, the vast majority of Israelis are not completely secular, right? A lot of these guys, especially like if they're Sephardi, most Sephardim started off religious in Israel, and then, eventually became secular. Right? I mean, it was really a disgrace. I mean, the vast majority of Jews, I believe in 1956, in the 60s, when they came from Spartan countries, when they were basically kicked out of Spartan countries, entered Israel religious, and around 30 years after, only around 5% remained religious. Right? I mean, it was devastating. I mean, the Sephardic communities in these Arab countries were religious for hundreds, even thousands of years. And only when they entered the secular state of Israel did they drop everything. But now they're coming back. They're definitely coming back now. There's a lot of outreach programs, and it's definitely a great thing. So there's a lot of people making comments like, I'm attacking Chabad, this and that. We can't make Judaism look ridiculous. So equivalent to Christians walking around with just telling irreligious Gentiles to eat a wafer. Just eat a wafer and God will bless you. Right? And this is very similar. I remember when I was in Meron. In Meron, during Lag BaOmer, everybody goes to dance and with the big bonfires, and everyone cuts their kids' hair for the first time there. So Chabad runs that place. And they walk around to everyone there because they know that all the soldiers and all the kids who are not religious are going to go there anyways, but they walk around just giving everyone wine just to make a bracha. Right? So that's not so far detached, right? But instead of sitting them down, trying to rationalize ethical monotheism with them, I mean, why try to get them to do something that they're doing unconsciously? I mean, mind you, they're just taking the wine because it's wine and they want to get a little buzz, right? But Chabad thinks that by someone doing something, doing an act that they know nothing about, that it affects them spiritually. This is what the Baal Tanya teaches. There's a story that the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, said about a child who was accidentally given non-kosher milk. And then he started doubting his religion. So this is the principle of Chabad, and I think Hasidus in general, that what you do, even unconsciously, affects your relationship with God. And that's something that the rabbis in the Talmud were against, because you can't punish someone for doing something that they didn't know was wrong.
No, I would not necessarily agree with that. And in fact, as I'm sure you're aware of, most of the, if not all of the sacrifices when the temple is standing are for chatot done in ignorance. So we are responsible even if we don't know.
We're not punished for breaking sins that we know nothing about. In terms of the sacrifices of why why we have to bring a korban chatat, it doesn't tell you why. I mean, it says that if you do something by mistake, but it's not that God punishes you for doing something by mistake. He's telling you that even if you did something by mistake, someone else suffers for it. But that in no way implies that if you do something good, not knowing what you did, that God is still going to bless you for it.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from.
If we would apply it to any other area to our life, it would seem illogical, ethically illogical, that someone should receive a medal. You know, for example, if someone was outside jogging and he didn't know that there was a marathon going on next to him, and then he crosses the finish line, I mean, should he really receive a medal? He didn't know what he was doing. In other words, if you're not conscious of the fact that you're actually keeping mitzvot and you're keeping them because Hashem said to keep them, you're not rewarded by God for keeping those mitzvot.
Well, I would say there are two aspects to that. First of all, it's the act that's done. And then, of course, as you're bringing out, what's in the person's heart? What's in the person's soul? Do they really think this means anything? Or do they think it's a bunch of nonsense? Or, do they think there might be something important to it? And then, on top of that, it's what they do with that. They asked me to wrap tefillin. I want to check that out. Why did they want me to do that? And it'll be hopefully they'll check it out and it will spur some interest in the Torah for them, as it did with me. Hopefully, walking through Washington Square Park many years ago during that 81 to 85 period when I still lived in Jersey after I went to Aish the first time, and I was walking through Central Park, and there are some Chabadniks there, and they asked me to wrap tefillin, and I said, sure. I was interested in checking it out. I wanted to know what the deal was. I had heard of it before, and I sat there. I talked with them for a little bit, asked them some questions. But one thing I want to ask before we go on, if you don't mind, you say you're a rationalist. So you don't accept the Zohar at all? I mean, I know there are rationalists. Like if you go to Masorah.org, that's a completely rationalist site. They don't accept the Zohar at all. Do you not accept the Zohar at all?
No. However, I have no problem viewing it just like any other midrash. In other words, midrashim are optional to believe. I mean, some are beautiful, and some really make no sense and contradict other midrashim. For sure, it wasn't a book written by Christians or Muslims, right? I believe it was written by Jews. I just don't believe it was written by rationalists,
but not to the point where you don't accept the Zohar. You'll read it as a darash, right? So you have to check it out. You're willing to check it out.
I'm pretty sure the guys from Masorah.org also have no problem reading the Zohar as just any medrash. Now, mind you, there are also silly midrashim in the Talmud too, right? I mean, so what are we going to do with those? So in other words, if someone only has
based on my experience with the rabbi from Masorah.org, it's absolute nonsense, the Zohar, completely. They will read it only to show that it's nothing of value at all. That's my
I'm pretty sure, like, if you corner him, and that's like Rabbi Moshe Ben Chaim, I mean, he's a great guy, I mean, from what I've read, I'm pretty sure that he would consider it just like he would consider any other Agadah or Midrash, any tale or legend that may appear in rabbinic literature, that are also destructive. In other words, there are many destructive ideas that predate the Zohar. Right? I mean, it's not just the Zohar.
I had many years of email conversations with Reb Moshe Chaim and Moshe Ben Chaim, and in my opinion, I did corner him. I mean, I said to him, do you accept the Arizal? Do you follow the Shulchan Aruch? Was it not written by a Kabbalist? No response.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right.
So
him and I may differ a little bit.
Oh, yeah, well.
Yeah, but he clearly has the right approach to things in many areas. And I have a video attacking many of the ideas in the Zohar, but I'm not going to say that it's an evil book. All I'm trying to say is let's make a distinction between what's source material and what's fluff. Now, fluff could be very pretty. It could be very uplifting. But if you walk on saying that the Zohar is holy, in other words, it was given on Mount Sinai and should be elevated to the same level as Torah, that's what I have a problem with.
I mean, that as well. I agree with that as well. Let me ask, what's your opinion of Rav Aryeh Kaplan's introduction to the Bahir? Because you mentioned the 13th century in our phone call earlier, and you said things took a turn. Correct me if I'm mistaken. I'm paraphrasing you. I'm not quoting you. That things took a turn south. You didn't use the word south, but I think you said it took a turn for the worse in that time, which is of course that's when the Ramban, introduced. Let me ask you this: do you believe in Gilgalim?
I don't.
Okay. All right. So I understand, more where you're coming
from. The idea of Gilgalim.
So what is your view of Rav Aryeh Kaplan's introduction to the Bahir? Because that's extremely an essential part of this. I mean, I learned so much just from his introduction to that. Have you read it?
No, I haven't read it. Now, mind you, Rav Aryeh Kaplan, died, I believe, maybe 25 years ago. But Sefer HaBahir claims to also be written by a Tana, by someone who lived in the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So, in my opinion, it's what's called pseudepigrapha. And there's a lot of things floating around like that in the Jewish world. Like there's another book called Kol HaTor that people nowadays claim was written by the Vilna Gaon, with all these mystical ideas with the last days and Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David and Eretz Yisrael. Again, I don't mind these books existing because there's many metaphysical ideas laid down by Tanai and by rabbis in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, all of that time, that we also do not accept as necessarily true. So why should now we say, oh, well, if it appears in the Zohar, well, then it's for sure true? No. Anything metaphysical?
I don't know of anyone who says that. I'm not saying there aren't, but I don't know of any. But I would highly...
I mean, if you believe in Gilgolim, in people being reincarnated, then you have accepted something for the Zohar as true, because the idea of reincarnation doesn't exist before the Zohar.
I disagree with that completely. I believe it's... again, I would highly suggest... I'm not talking about the Bahir. I'm talking about Rav Kaplan's introduction to it. It was one of the most pivotal turning points in my life. If you haven't read that, I kindly suggest you do. And I'd like to know your opinion of it. You know, I'd like to see what you have to say about it. You sound like an intelligent person. I'd love to hear your critique of that. So
yeah, I mean, I'm down for learning and even studying the Zohar, but not from an authoritative perspective. Now, I have no problem with people internalizing certain ideas in mystical Judaism, saying that, you know what, this speaks to me, and I'm accepting this as part of my life and even part of my religious walk. I have no problem with that, but that's not what occurs nowadays. Nowadays, people say, if you don't believe in an idea in the Zohar, then you're a heretic. If you don't believe in reincarnation, you're a heretic. The vast majority of the Jews say that if you don't believe in reincarnation, you're a heretic. You know, because you're disagreeing with the Zohar. They're saying, do you know more than by Shimon Bar Yochai, who they teach wrote the Zohar? In other words,
your belief that that's founded in the Zohar from our perspective. I mean, the people who believe in Gilgolim. When I say our, all right, I don't. Yes, this is again. You know, if you haven't read, I don't mean that like this is the know-it-all of everything, but it's what we're discussing, what we're debating here is so clearly explained by Rev Kaplan and about what happened in the 13th century. And he clarifies everything as far as completely knocking the idea that the ideas of Gilgolim and many in the Zohar are not based in the Torah and the Talmud, which they clearly are. After checking out all the facts that I have, that was the most extreme pivotal. When I read that, oh my goodness, Baruch Hashem, I was like, wow. Now it explains why the Rambam and Saadia Gaon didn't know about these things, and Saadia Gaon calls it foolishness and stupidity. You know, but when the Ramban came out, who clearly believed in Gilgolim, and why? What happened in there? I was always, you know, what's going on here? But when I read the introduction to the Bahir, it was all explained with complete rational sense, logical. Explains everything.
I'll look into it. I mean, I'll definitely look into it. I'm not against the idea of reincarnation, by the way. I mean, I like the idea of reincarnation, but I'm against people calling it part of Judaism. I mean, I honestly wish that reincarnation does exist. I mean, I want to come back again and again. I mean, hopefully with some consciousness of my previous life. The problem I have is when people say Judaism says...
Laughing with you, not at you.
Okay, no problem. My problem is that when someone says Judaism says and quote the Tanya or quote the Zohar or quote an idea of reincarnation, I don't believe Judaism teaches reincarnation. I wish it's true, right? I mean, I wish there's an afterlife in Judaism, or at least Torah. The 5 books of Moses in itself doesn't speak about a heaven or a hell. You know, I personally believe in it. I believe in a heaven and a hell, even though, I mean, the Torah is not explicit. I believe there has to be one for God to be just. But
wait,
I'm a purist.
Believe in heaven? I'm sorry, you don't believe in heaven and hell, is what you said?
No, I do believe in heaven and hell, but I don't think the Torah tells me or requires me to believe in it because it doesn't mention it. So in other words, there are things I do believe.
The first pasuk of the Torah says there's a heaven.
Hold on. Like Shemayim in Hebrew would just mean sky. I mean, it doesn't mean heaven like a cloud and harps and people waiting there. Right? It just means the sky. And it's not, yeah.
Can you
just
show
the
me?
King James translates it.
Can you show me any translation that translates it as in the beginning God created the sky and the earth?
So whenever someone says the heavens, they mean the sky. You could ask your rabbi after this conversation. It doesn't mean the world to come.
I've discussed this.
Okay, so fine.
Yeah.
It's to the point, but that you're almost never going to find a rabbi use the word heaven to refer to the world to come, because they teach the world to come is on earth. So in other words, it's not in Shemayim. I mean, it's more of a Christian argument that it's an actual in the sky. Right? I mean, there's some ideas that the temple will come from the sky, or even the Messiah will come in the cloud.
I've always called that heaven on earth.
Okay, all right.
That's the way I put it. Now, just to get back, because you're making a lot of points, and I don't want to. I agree with a lot of them. Some of them I disagree with. But what I've been taught about reincarnation is this. And this is from Orthodox Jews, studied, partners in Torah. I mean, Chabad, Miznagdim, all of them have told me this, that it's not a mitzvot. So if you don't believe in it, it's okay. All right? The important thing is for us to follow the mitzvot. All right? And the halachas on the mitzvot, that believing in reincarnation is not required. No. If you've heard people say that it's required, I believe you. But I've never heard anyone tell me that it's a requirement to believe in it, even though the majority of Torah-observant Jews do. Let me ask
good
you
teachers.
this.
I mean,
Jeff Seidel, do you think he believes in reincarnation?
I don't know. I mean, I would say he does. No.
Yeah, of course.
No,
of course.
I would say he does.
You don't say that he does?
No, I believe he does.
Absolutely, of course. I learned about reincarnation at Aish from Reb Noach. You met Reb Noach?
Sure,
right?
sure.
Right. Had a few discussions with him one-on-one in his office. Was over his house for dinner, with other, people from the yeshiva there. So I'm not saying he invited me personally, but I did develop a relationship with him in '81, and I debated him in his office. Who are you? Look at you. I'll tell you what I said to him. I said, Reb Noach, you smoke cigarettes. You teach the 48 ways to wisdom. If you want to do anything, read the 48 ways. Well, if you want to stop smoking, read the 48 ways. And he said to me, who are you? And me being the 17, 18-year-old I was, I live in Bayonne, New Jersey. It dawned on me 3 years later, that he wasn't asking, who am I as in, the physical aspect. He was asking me, who are you to be questioning me? Where are you coming from to question me? Now, I went back to him in '89, and I sat in his office, and I apologized to him. I said I was very critical of Aish, but you planted a seed. But I'm going to tell you, Reb Noach, you should still stop smoking cigarettes. All right? And we had a laugh about it. And I don't have to tell you, about the rest of his life and, what happened. So learned about, getting back to the point, I learned about Gilgolim from Aish and from Jeff Seidel and from these people who taught you. But in listening to you and knowing now that you're a convert from, a Christian family, it sheds a whole lot of light on where you're coming from, Asher. It totally sheds a lot of light. I'd like